Smoky, stay. What do you hear?
The German Shepherd had been digging for 11 minutes, and the bearded man beside her had stopped asking why. 14 inches down, his shovel struck something that was not earth. A sealed nylon bag, heat-welded 30 years ago, lifted out of the cold desert sand. Inside it, a woman's name. A treaty worth nearly $1 billion, a United States senator who believed every copy had been burned. His name was Jax Harlan, combat veteran, homeless, sleeping in his truck outside Artesia, New Mexico. Hers was Smoky, battle partner, the only soul who had not walked away. What they found in that parking lot was about to reopen a murder. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from today. The state park lot on the eastern edge of Artesia was not really a parking lot so much as a forgotten rectangle of cracked asphalt that the county had poured in 1987 and never quite remembered to maintain. Weeds pushed up through the seams. A battered wooden sign at the entrance announced picnic area and restrooms with an arrow pointing toward a cinder block structure whose plumbing had failed sometime during the second Bush administration. The restrooms were locked. The picnic tables were gone. What remained was the asphalt, a chain-link fence sagging toward the desert, and a single mercury vapor lamp on a tall steel pole that came on at 8:47 p.m. every evening, with a sound like a moth being electrocuted, and threw a circle of sick orange light across the northern end of the lot until 6:14 the following morning. Jax Harlan parked his truck outside that circle of light. He had learned, somewhere in a training compound in Fort Benning a lifetime ago, that light attracts attention, and attention attracts questions, and questions were the one thing a man living in his vehicle could not afford. So he pulled the old Ford F-150, 2003, faded blue paint, 287,000 miles on the odometer and rust eating the wheel wells, into the shadow at the far southern corner of the lot, tucked up against a stand of salt cedar that had grown wild along the fence line and killed the engine. The motor ticked as it cooled. The desert wind pushed through the salt cedar branches with a dry, papery rustle. Somewhere 2 miles to the west, the highway hissed with the passage of a single big rig heading down toward the Texas line. He sat in the driver's seat for a long time before he moved. This was a ritual now, a protocol. Soldiers' discipline applied to a life that no longer had any use for soldiers. He sat and he breathed, and he let his eyes adjust to the dark, and he ran a slow inventory of every sound the desert was making within a 200-yard radius. The salt cedar, the wind, a coyote somewhere far off to the north, singing a thin, lonely note to a moon that was not yet full. The distant hum of the oil field compressors south of town, a sound that never stopped, not day or night, a sound that had become the heartbeat of Artesia itself since the boom began 3 years ago. Smoky sat upright in the passenger seat, her ears forward, her amber eyes tracking the same perimeter his were. She had not relaxed since they pulled in. She never did. Not until Jax's shoulders dropped first. She was waiting on him. The way she had always waited on him. The way she had waited on him in a dusty compound in Kandahar province when the call came down to move, and the way she would wait on him now in a parking lot in New Mexico where the only mission left was surviving until morning. He reached across the bench seat and laid his scarred right hand flat on the thick fur between her shoulder blades. The heat of her body came up through her double coat into his palm, steady and alive and absolutely real, and something in his chest that had been wound tight since the pipeline accident 6 days ago loosened by 1/4 turn. "All right, girl," he said, his voice low and rough from the day's dust. "We're home." Home. The word was a joke he made only to her, and only in the dark, and only because he needed to hear somebody say it. He got out of the truck. The air was cold, 42 degrees at this hour, the desert dumping its daytime heat back into the sky as fast as the sun went down, and it bit at the exposed skin of his wrists and the back of his neck above the collar of the surplus jacket. The jacket was fraying at the cuffs. It had been fraying at the cuffs for 9 years. He had not replaced it because there was nothing wrong with it that he could not live with, and because the elbows and shoulders were still sound, And because it had been issued to him in 2014, and he had worn it through 2 deployments, and he was not going to throw away a thing that had kept him warm in mountains where the temperature dropped below 0 just because the cuffs had gone soft. Smoky jumped down after him, landing with the quiet, controlled grace that had survived the wound and the surgery and the 3 years of retirement. She shook herself once, a full-body shake that rippled from her nose to the tip of her tail, and then she stood looking up at him, waiting for the hand signal that meant perimeter. He gave it. 2 fingers, a small circle in the air. She moved off into the dark without a sound. Jax walked to the back of the truck and lowered the tailgate. The metal creaked. The tailgate had been creaking since a roadside bomb in 2016 had rolled the vehicle he was riding in and broken his collarbone in 3 places, and even though the truck itself had nothing to do with that event, the sound of the creaking tailgate was tied in his mind to the sound of metal folding, and every single time he lowered it, he felt the old cold climb up the back of his neck and then subside because he had trained himself to recognize the feeling and let it pass without naming it. He climbed into the bed. The blue tarp lay folded at the wheel well. Under the tarp was his sleeping setup, a self-inflating camping pad, a wool blanket that had been his grandfather's and smelled of old smoke and older cedar, a military-grade sleeping bag rated to 0 degrees, and a canvas duffel bag containing everything he owned in the world. He did not unfold any of it yet. It was not time. The routine demanded that he eat first and check on Smoky and make sure the salt cedar had no eyes in it, before he allowed himself to lie down. He climbed back out. He walked to the passenger side. He opened the door, reached under the seat, and pulled out the coffee can. The coffee can was a Folgers 1-pounder, empty, with a slit cut in the plastic lid. It held, at the moment, $11.37 in crumpled singles and coins. This was everything he had. The 2 weeks he had worked on the pipeline crew had paid him cash, a fact he had been grateful for at the time and was now merely realistic about, and most of that cash had gone to fuel and dog food and a single hot meal at a diner on the north side of town 6 days ago that he had eaten slowly and deliberately, because he had not known when the next one would come. The coffee can did not rattle when he shook it. That was not a good sign. He set it back under the seat. From the glove box he took out 3 things: a small propane camp stove, a dented aluminum pot, and a Ziploc bag containing the last of the oatmeal. He did not take out the other thing in the glove box. He never took out the other thing. The other thing was a letter. It had arrived at his sister's house in Bozeman 14 months ago, and she had forwarded it to a post office box he had rented in Missoula, and from there he had picked it up and put it into the glove box, and he had not opened it. The return address on the envelope read Martinez and Keel Attorneys at Law, Billings, Montana, and beneath that, handwritten in his ex-wife's familiar slanting script, were the words, "Please read this, Jax. I'm sorry." He had not opened it. He was not going to open it. There were things a man could carry and things he could not, and the contents of that envelope were a thing he could not, because once he knew what was inside, he would have to have an opinion about it, and he no longer had the capacity to have opinions about what Elena had done to him. The house in Bozeman, the savings account, the truck that had not been this truck, the one with her name on the title that she had sold to pay her new boyfriend's gambling debt while Jax was in the VA ward in Helena, recovering from the surgery that had rebuilt the left side of his jaw. The divorce papers served to him in the recovery room, handed to him by a process server in a cheap suit who had apologized and left so fast his shoes squeaked on the tile. He had signed them. He had signed everything. It had been easier than fighting. The letter was probably an apology. It might even be a sincere one. Elena had never been a cruel woman, only a frightened one, and frightened people did things that cruel people had to plan for years to accomplish. But he was not interested in her apology. He was interested in her absence. He had worked very hard for 14 months on her absence. He was not going to undo that work by opening an envelope. He lit the camp stove. The blue flame bloomed in the dark. He set the pot on the burner and poured in water from a gallon jug and added the oatmeal and sat down on the tailgate to wait for it to boil. Smoky came back out of the dark. She did this every night. Her perimeter sweep, a slow loop of the entire parking lot that took her between 6 and 9 minutes, depending on what smells she found and how long she lingered on them. Tonight, she came back at the 8-minute mark, which was average, and she sat down at his feet without being told, and she looked up at him, and her amber eyes said nothing was wrong. He let out a breath he had not known he was holding. She thumped her tail once against the asphalt in acknowledgement. Exactly once, the way she always did. He ate the oatmeal out of the pot with a spoon. He gave her a cup of kibble from the bag he kept behind the passenger seat. He refilled her water bowl from the jug. He watched her eat with the same slow, methodical attention she brought to every task in her life, her amber eyes half closed in contentment, her big square head lowered over the bowl, and he thought, not for the first time, that this dog was the only living creature on the planet who had seen him at his worst and had not flinched, and that whatever he still had left in him to give, he owed her. When the oatmeal was gone and the pot was rinsed and the stove was cool, he climbed into the bed of the truck and unrolled the sleeping pad and spread the wool blanket over it and unzipped the sleeping bag halfway. Smoky jumped up after him and turned 3 slow circles on the blanket and settled down pressed against his left hip with her back to him and her head facing the open tailgate so that anything coming at them in the night would have to come through her first. He did not sleep for a long time. He lay on his back and looked up at the stars. There were more of them out here than any city sky had ever contained, an absolute blanket of light thrown across the dark, the Milky Way, a cold river running diagonally from the eastern horizon to the western, and he let his eyes travel its length, the way he had learned to do on nights in the mountains, when sleep would not come and the wiring in his head was too loud to shut off. He did not count the stars. He did not name them, he only let them be there, and he let himself be beneath them, and sometimes, on the better nights, this was enough to carry him into the first 2 hours of fragmented rest before the dreams started. Tonight was not going to be a better night. He knew it in the way his left leg would not stop twitching. He knew it in the way the cold of the desert kept finding its way through the sleeping bag to settle along his spine. He knew it in the way the sound of the oil field compressors 2 miles south kept cycling up and down in a rhythm that was almost but not quite the rhythm of a helicopter rotor in the distance. And every time the sound rose, his body tightened, and every time it fell his body released a little, and the cumulative effect was a slow draining of whatever reserves he had left for the night. And he knew it because he kept thinking about the pipeline. 6 days ago. The compressor station north of the refinery. The pipeline crew had been running a pressure test on a new section of feeder line, a routine operation, and something in one of the release valves had been set wrong, and when they dropped the pressure the valve had not vented cleanly, and the air had come out of it all at once in a single enormous explosive bark that sounded exactly like a mortar round going off 17 feet behind him. He did not remember what happened next. That was the truth of it. He had a memory of the sound, and then a memory of a man on the ground, and then a memory of the foreman, Carl Brennan, standing over him with his mouth open, and then a memory of Brennan's voice saying the words he could not stop hearing even now, 6 days later, lying in the bed of his truck under the stars in a state park parking lot. "You are a hazard to this crew, and I want you off this site in 10 minutes. The man on the ground had been a kid from Odessa named Richie. He was 19. He had approached Jax from behind to ask a question about a torque wrench, and the mortar round had gone off, and Jax had spun and hit him in the chest with a closed fist hard enough to put him on his back in the gravel. And by the time Jax's brain had caught up to his body, the kid was looking up at him with wide, frightened eyes and holding his ribs and not saying anything at all. Richie had not been hurt. Not really. A bruise, maybe a cracked rib. The paramedic who came out had cleared him on the spot and sent him home for the day with ice and an aspirin. And Richie himself, to his credit, had tried to tell Brennan that it was his own fault, that he should not have come up behind a combat veteran without calling out first, that he had been warned on his first day to never do exactly what he had just done. Brennan had not listened. Brennan had listened to the word hazard and the word liability and the word insurance, and those words had been louder than anything a 19-year-old kid could say, And Jax had been off the worksite in 9 minutes with his last cash pay in an envelope, and Brennan's voice still ringing in his ears. Hazard. He had been called many things in his life. He had been called a soldier, and he had been called a hero, and he had been called a husband, and he had been called, once, in the dark, by a woman he had loved more than his own life. Baby, please come home. He had been called none of those things in a very long time, but he had never been called a hazard until 6 days ago by a man who had known him for 14 days, and the word had lodged somewhere beneath his sternum like a piece of shrapnel, and it had not worked its way out yet. He turned his head on the rolled-up jacket he was using as a pillow and looked at Smoky. She was awake. Of course she was. She was always awake when he was, and she would not sleep until his breathing evened out, and she would wake the moment it changed again. He reached down with his right hand and laid it on her flank. Her coat was thick and warm. Her ribs rose and fell beneath his palm in the slow, steady rhythm of a dog who was at peace because her man was alive. "I'm all right," he whispered. She did not move. "I'm all right," he said again, and this time he meant it for himself. Somewhere deep in the canvas duffel bag at the foot of the sleeping pad, wrapped inside a rolled-up athletic sock at the very bottom where he did not have to see it every day, was a plain gold wedding band. It had been his for 14 years. He had not worn it in 16 months. He had told himself many times that he kept it because gold was worth something, and a man in his position could not afford to throw away worth, but this was a lie, and he knew it was a lie, and Smoky knew it was a lie, and the stars overhead knew it was a lie, and the only reason he kept it was because throwing it away would be a decision, and he was not yet ready to make any more decisions about Elena. The wind moved through the salt cedar. The oil field compressors cycled up and cycled down. Somewhere beyond the fence, a coyote called, and another answered, and the sound was thin and lonely, and it did not frighten him at all. He closed his eyes. Smoky's breathing slowed. The first shallow layer of sleep took him at 11:47 p.m., according to the dashboard clock, and it would hold him for exactly 2 hours and 11 minutes before the dreams came and drove him back up to the surface again. This was his life. This was every night. And Artesia, New Mexico, all 11,000 of its oil-fat souls, slept on in its bright new houses and its boom-time subdivisions and its freshly paved streets, and not a single person in that town knew that a combat veteran and a retired military working dog were sleeping in a truck at the edge of the state park. And not a single person would have cared if they had known, because Artesia was busy getting rich. And rich towns do not have the time to notice the men they have already decided not to see. Day 6 began the way every other day had begun since the firing, which was to say it did not begin, it simply continued. Jax came up out of the shallow end of sleep at 4:52 a.m., 2 minutes before the alarm he had not needed to set in 11 years, and he lay on his back in the bed of the truck with his eyes open and let the ceiling of stars above him slowly gray toward morning. The desert at that hour was a held breath. The wind had died somewhere around 3. The oil field compressors, which never actually stopped, had settled into the low bass hum that signaled the pre-dawn shift change. The coyotes had gone to wherever coyotes went when the sky began to warm. The only sound in the parking lot was the soft, measured breathing of the German Shepherd pressed against his left hip, and that sound, as always, was the first thing he registered and the last thing he checked before he moved. She was awake. Her amber eyes were open in the gloom, turned not toward him, but toward the fence at the northern end of the lot. And there was something in the set of her ears, forward, high, alert but not alarmed, that he had learned to read more reliably than any instrument panel he had ever been trained on. She had noticed something. It was not a threat. He knew the shape of her threat, response the way a musician knows the shape of his own hands, and this was not that. Her body was relaxed along her spine, her tail lay quiet against the wool blanket, but her focus was absolute, and it was aimed at a specific point, somewhere past the fence line in the salt cedar, and she had been aimed at that point, he understood now, for some unknown portion of the night. "What have you got?" "Girl?" he murmured. She did not turn her head. She did not acknowledge him at all, which was itself an acknowledgement, because Smoky never ignored him. And the only time she failed to respond to her name was when she was running a tracking protocol that required her full neurological bandwidth. He sat up slowly. The cold hit him first. The temperature had dropped into the high 30s overnight, and the sleeping bag had trapped enough body heat that the moment he unzipped it, the air took the warmth back like a debt collector. He pulled the wool blanket around his shoulders and swung his legs over the side of the sleeping pad and slid his feet into the combat boots he had set at the edge of the truck bed the previous night. Boots on, always boots on before a foot touched the ground, a protocol he would carry to his grave. He laced them by feel. Smoky still had not turned her head. He climbed out of the truck bed and lowered himself to the asphalt and stood in the pre-dawn chill and waited. Somewhere to the east, the horizon was beginning to take on the faintest pale stain of coming light, not yet color, only the absence of absolute black. The mercury vapor lamp on its pole still burned orange. The salt cedar stand was a mass of darker black against the dark, and within it there was nothing moving, nothing he could see, nothing he could hear. But Smoky saw it, or smelled it, or both. She came down out of the truck bed in a single fluid motion that made no sound, landed on all four paws in the dust at his feet, and without pausing to check in with him, walked across the parking lot in a straight, deliberate line toward the fence. This was not her perimeter patrol. Her perimeter patrol was a loop. This was a vector. He followed her. She stopped 4 feet short of the chain-link fence, and she lowered her nose to the asphalt, and she began to sample the ground in the small, intricate patterns that he had watched her run 1,000 times in training and on deployment, nose down, head swinging in short arcs, moving from one invisible line of scent to another, cross-referencing. Her tail was perfectly still. This was work. She tracked east along the fence for approximately 12 feet. Then she stopped. She turned 90 degrees and walked into the stand of salt cedar at a point where the chain link had sagged enough for a coyote to pass beneath, and she was through it before he could call her name, and he did not call it, because calling a working dog off a track was something you did only in emergency, and nothing about this was emergency. He followed her. He had to bend double to get under the fence. The salt cedar closed around him on both sides, dry branches scraping the shoulders of his jacket, the cold morning dust kicking up under his boots. Smoky was 9 feet ahead of him, a gray-brown shape moving low through the brush, and she was no longer sampling the air. She had found what she was looking for. She was on it now. She broke out of the salt cedar into a small clearing about 20 feet into the stand, a bare patch of sand and gravel where the brush had failed to take root, roughly the size of a parking space. She stopped at the center of the clearing. She lowered her head. She looked at the ground. Then she began to dig. And Jax stood at the edge of the clearing in the gray pre-dawn light, and he watched her, and he understood, in the way a handler understands his dog, that this was not play. Her front paws moved in a fast, powerful alternation, sand and small gravel spraying out behind her in a thin brown fan, and there was nothing of a dog's ordinary digging in it, no pause to sniff the progress, no looking up at him for approval, no playfulness in her posture at all. Her ears were pinned slightly forward, her shoulders were low and working. She was searching. She had been searching, he realized now, since sometime in the night. She had held the position. She had waited for light, and the moment the eastern horizon had begun to lighten, she had brought him here. 75 pounds of German Shepherd, digging in the New Mexico desert at 5 in the morning, with the focused certainty of an animal who knew exactly what she expected to find. He moved into the clearing. "Smoke," he said softly. She did not break rhythm. Her front paws kept moving. The hole was already 4 inches deep. He knelt beside her. He put his hand on her shoulder. The muscle beneath her coat was hard and working and warm. He felt the hum of her focus through his palm like a low electric current. He kept his hand there for a 3 count, and then he lifted it away, and he reached into the cargo pocket of his jacket, and he pulled out the folding army-issue shovel he kept there out of habit, and he unfolded it and locked the handle. "Let me help," he said. He did not know who he was talking to. Smoky. Himself. The desert. Isabel Redhorse, although he did not know her name yet. He began to dig beside her. The soil was old sand and caliche and small gravel, the dry, crumbly substrate of the Pecos River Valley that had been compressed and sun-baked since the last rain event 3 months ago, and it broke apart under the shovel blade in clean, dry shovelsful that Smoky's paws then scooped out of the hole without his having to ask. They worked together. They had worked together before, in compounds and caves and ditches half a world away, and their rhythm came back to them without thought. His blade, her paws, his blade, her paws, and the hole grew deeper. 6 inches. 8 inches. 10. At 12 inches he stopped and knelt down and put his bare hand into the sand and felt for anything that the shovel might miss. Any shift in texture, any edge, any object. Nothing yet. Smoky pressed her nose to the bottom of the hole and inhaled deeply and pulled back and sat down, her amber eyes fixed on the earth. And she did not move again. Her part was done. She had found it. Now the man had to reach it. He kept digging. 14 inches. The shovel blade struck something that was not earth. It was not metal, it was not stone, it was soft and giving, but it had resistance, and the sound it made was the small, dull scrape of a blade against a sealed plastic surface. He froze, he set the shovel aside. He went to both knees in the sand, and he leaned down into the hole, and he worked his fingers around the edges of whatever it was by feel. And he traced its outline, and he understood that it was rectangular, and about the size of a large manila envelope, and it was wrapped in something that was not dirt. He loosened the earth around it. He lifted it out. It was a nylon bag. Not a modern Ziploc. A purpose-made polymer bag, thick as a butcher's apron, with a heat-welded seam running along one edge, the kind of seal you saw in evidence pouches and waterproof military document carriers. The nylon had been yellow once, a brilliant warning tape yellow. 3 decades of subsurface burial had turned it the color of old parchment. A thin layer of very fine sand clung to it in a pattern that suggested it had been buried upright and on its long edge like a book on a shelf. He stood up slowly. His knees cracked. He held the bag in both hands in the gray light, and he turned it over once and then again, and through the translucent polymer he could make out the square shape of folded paper inside. Smoky watched him. Her amber eyes were half closed now. Her ears had relaxed. Her tail thumped the ground once, softly. "Good girl," he said. The words came out rough. Good girl." He did not open the bag in the clearing. Some instinct he could not name told him not to. He slid it inside his jacket, against his left side, under the arm, where a pistol would have gone in another life, and he refolded the shovel and clipped it back to his belt, and he walked out of the clearing and back through the salt cedar and under the sagging fence and across the parking lot to the truck, and Smoky paced at his left heel the whole way, the old heel position, the working position, as though she understood that the mission was not yet complete and she was still on escort. He climbed into the driver's seat. He closed the door. He sat with the bag across his thighs, and he stared at it. The eastern sky beyond the windshield had begun to show color now, a thin band of pale peach along the horizon that was starting to bleed into a washed-out orange, and the parking lot around him was emerging from the gray into the brown, and the mercury vapor lamp on its pole buzzed once and went dark as its photocell registered the morning. He took out his folding knife. He cut the heat-welded seam with a single careful draw. The nylon parted. He reached inside and drew out what was there. It was a stack of paper, maybe 40 sheets, typewritten on an old manual machine, the letters slightly irregular, the way typewritten letters used to be when the strike of each key was a human act rather than a digital one. The paper was good bond, the color of old cream. It had not yellowed, because no light had reached it. It had not fragmented, because no moisture had reached it. The desert, which kills everything soft in its time, had in this one instance preserved a thing perfectly. The first page read, in bold centered capitals. Below it, a date, September 14th, 1956. Below that, 2 signature lines. One was signed in a careful, looping hand, Chairman Wendell Chino. The other, in a sharper, angled script, read Senator Roy Taggart, the elder, the father, dead since 1989. Jax turned the page. He read the first paragraph, then the second, then the third. He was not a lawyer. He had never read a federal treaty in his life, but the language of the document was plain enough that even a man who had dropped out of community college after 1 semester could understand what it said. And what it said was this. The United States government in 1956 had recognized the Mescalero Apache Tribe's subsurface mineral rights on 23,000 acres of land along the Pecos River Valley, an area that in 1956 had been considered agriculturally marginal and economically worthless, and had entered into a royalty-sharing agreement in good faith and in perpetuity. The agreement had never been terminated. It had only disappeared. And 23,000 acres along the Pecos River Valley now contained 14 operational oil and gas extraction sites, the revenue of which had been flowing, uninterrupted, into the accounts of non-Mescalero parties for nearly 70 years. Jax lowered the document to his lap. He looked out through the windshield at the parking lot. The sky had gone full orange now. A thin wedge of sun was breaking the eastern horizon and throwing the first long shadows across the asphalt, and his truck's shadow stretched out westward across the cracked surface like a black finger pointing at something he could not see. Smoky was sitting on the passenger seat. She was watching him. Her amber eyes were absolutely steady. He thumbed through the rest of the pages. Standard legal language. Maps. Coordinates. Signatures of witnesses. A notary seal from Chaves County, New Mexico, dated September 14th, 1956. He reached the last page. And then he reached the thing that was not part of the original document at all. A single small square of lined paper, the kind torn from a yellow legal pad, folded once in half and tucked between the back of the final signature page and the inside of the nylon bag. He unfolded it. It was a pencil note. The handwriting was small and precise and feminine, and the graphite had not faded, because graphite, unlike ink, is a mineral, and minerals do not fade in dry air. The note read, "If you're reading this, I did not come back for it. My name is Isabel Redhorse. I am an attorney for the Mescalero Apache Tribe. I filed for original discovery in October 1993 and was denied. I believe the copy at the National Archives has been altered. This is a carbon of the original, made by my grandfather, who was a clerk at the signing. The parking lot at the old state park was chosen because no one owns it and no one watches it. If I am not the one who recovers this, I trust that whoever does will know what to do. Take it to Mara. She is my granddaughter. She will be born in April 1995. Tell her I am sorry I could not stay." The signature was a single word. Isabel. Jax read the note twice. Then a third time. The sun came up over the eastern horizon, and the orange light filled the cab of the truck and fell across the page and across his scarred hands and across the German Shepherd sitting on the passenger seat with her amber eyes steady on his face. Somewhere very far inside his chest, in a place he did not visit often, something he had thought was dead turned over in its sleep. A tapping on the driver's side window. He looked up. There was a young woman standing outside his truck. She was in her late 20s or early 30s, black hair pulled back into a long single braid, a canvas jacket zipped to her throat, jeans and work boots, and a small bouquet of orange wildflowers held in her right hand. Her face was Mescalero, high and clean and absolutely composed, and her dark eyes were fixed on the nylon bag on his lap, and the expression on her face was not fear or confusion, but something much stranger. It was recognition. She knocked once more on the glass. Jax rolled the window down 2 inches. "I'm sorry," she said. Her voice was quiet and steady. "I come here every March, to this parking lot. My grandmother died on a road near here in 1994, and I come here every March, and I've never understood why I come here. I just always have." She paused. She looked at the bag. She looked at his face. "I think I'm supposed to be here right now." Jax did not answer for a long moment. Smoky, on the passenger seat, turned her amber eyes to the young woman, and her ears came forward, and her tail thumped once, softly, against the bench. Jax looked down at the pencil note in his hand. He looked up at the young woman. He looked at the flowers she was carrying. "Your name," he said. "Is it Mara?" The young woman went very still. "Yes," she said. Jax closed his eyes for 1 full second. When he opened them again, the world had changed shape around him, and he understood with a certainty he had not felt about anything in 16 months, that whatever this was, he was not going to walk away from it, and neither was she, and that a woman named Isabel Redhorse had been waiting in the desert since 1994 for this exact morning to arrive. He unlocked the passenger door. "Get in," he said. "I think we need to talk." Mara Redhorse sat on the passenger side of the bench seat with her hands folded around the wildflowers in her lap, and Smoky had shifted to the middle without being asked, and the German Shepherd's amber eyes moved between the young woman and Jax with the quiet, measured attention of a creature who had decided that this new human was not a threat, but had not yet decided whether she was safe. Mara had not cried. Jax had been watching for it, not because he wanted her to cry, but because he wanted to know what kind of person she was. And people revealed themselves in the first 60 seconds after receiving news that reshaped their lives. Some collapsed, some raged. A few laughed, a dry, bitter laugh that was not laughter at all, but the body's effort to release an overload. Mara had done none of these things. She had read the pencil note twice, the same way he had, and then she had set it carefully on the dashboard, and she had placed both of her hands flat on the canvas of her jacket over her own heart, and she had closed her eyes, and she had breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth 3 full cycles before she opened them again. When she did, her eyes were wet, but the tears did not fall. "I was 10 months old," she said, "when she died." Jax nodded once. "My mother has a photograph of her holding me the day I was born. It's the only one that exists of us together. My grandmother was 41. She paused. She looked at the windshield, not at him. "They told us it was a single-car accident. Her truck went off Highway 82, about 6 miles west of Mayhill, on a stretch of road that has a guardrail on one side but not the other. She rolled down an embankment. The coroner said her blood alcohol was .18. My grandmother did not drink. She was Mescalero, and she had watched what alcohol did to our people for 40 years, and she did not drink, not ever. Not 1 glass of wine at a wedding, not 1 beer at a 4th of July. We knew. My mother knew, my uncle knew. Everyone in the family knew, but she was a native woman in 1994 in rural New Mexico, and when the coroner said .18 there was nothing any of us could do." Jax did not speak. "We always said," Mara continued, "that someone had poured it into her. After." To explain why she went off the road, she finally turned her head and looked at him. "We said it, but we did not have proof. We did not have a reason. We did not have a why." Jax looked down at the pencil note. "Now you have a why," he said. The cab of the truck was warming as the sun climbed, and the cold that had sat in Jax's bones since before dawn had begun to release, and somewhere outside in the parking lot a bird was calling, some small desert sparrow going about the business of being alive on a morning that had become, for 2 particular human beings, no longer an ordinary morning. "Who knew?" he asked. Mara shook her head slowly. "I don't know. My mother said my grandmother had been working on something big in the last year of her life. She would drive to Santa Fe twice a month. She would come home tired, but not the tired of a person who has been beaten, the tired of a person who is carrying something heavy and knows she is going to get it where it needs to go. She looked down at her hands. She told my mother once that she had found a thing that was going to change everything for our people. My mother asked what it was. My grandmother said, "I cannot tell you yet, because if I tell you, you become part of it, and I do not want you in this with me until I know it is safe." Jax lifted the document off his lap. He looked at it. He thought about 40 sheets of paper in a polymer bag under 14 inches of sand for 31 years, while a woman's name became a tragedy in a family and a footnote in a county coroner's report. He thought about the kind of person who chose that parking lot because no one owned it and no one watched it. He thought about the kind of person who stole an hour to bury something that might outlive her and who had been right to do it. "I need to ask you a question," he said. Mara was quiet for a long moment. "I want to," she said, "but I don't trust them." "Why?" "Because my grandmother didn't. And she knew more than I do." Jax nodded. He folded the 40 sheets and the pencil note back into the nylon bag, and he set the bag on the dashboard beside the wildflowers, which were already beginning to wilt in the climbing heat. "There's a process," he said. "County records. Chain of custody. We take it there first. We make sure it's photographed and logged. We get receipts. Anything that happens to us after that, the document is already in the system. It can't disappear a second time." "No," he said. "But I've been trained to secure things that people want to destroy." She looked at him for a long moment. "Who are you?" she said. It was not quite a question. "Jax Harlan. I was a sergeant in the United States Army for 12 years. I worked with her." He tilted his head towards Smoky. "She's a retired MWD. We were both discharged in 2021, and we have been, for the most part, on our own since then." Mara nodded. She did not apologize for him. She did not look uncomfortable. She looked, if anything, like a woman who had grown up on a reservation and knew exactly what it looked like when the United States of America threw away someone who had served it. "All right," she said. "I'll drive. I know the clerk at the county office. He's an old friend of my mother's. He'll make sure we get proper receipts." Jax turned the key. The engine coughed, caught, settled into its uneven idle. They drove. The Eddy County Records Office was on the second floor of a low brick building on the north side of Artesia, across the street from a donut shop and a bail bondsman and a hair salon that had changed names 3 times in 5 years. They parked in the public lot. Smoky stayed in the truck with the windows cracked. Mara went up the stairs first, and Jax followed her with the nylon bag tucked inside his jacket, and they stood together at the counter and they waited. The clerk was a man in his late 50s, named Felix Ortiz, a round-faced man with reading glasses on a cord around his neck and a Dallas Cowboys mug on his desk. And when he saw Mara, his entire face softened. They spoke briefly in Spanish. He came out from behind the counter and hugged her. And over her shoulder he saw Jax and nodded once, a small respectful nod that Jax returned. "What do you need?" Felix said. In English now. "I need you to photograph and log a document," Mara said. "And I need you to do it before anyone else in this building knows it exists." Felix looked at her. Felix looked at Jax. Felix looked at the nylon bag. He did not ask what it was. "Follow me," he said. He took them to a small back room. He set up a document scanner. He pulled on a pair of clean cotton archival gloves, the kind every county clerk in America kept in a drawer for the rare occasion when something old came across their desk, and he took the 40 sheets from Jax's hands one by one, and he scanned each page twice, once in color and once in grayscale. And he logged the metadata, and he burned the scans onto 2 separate external hard drives, and he sealed each drive in its own evidence envelope, and he initialed the seals. The whole process took 47 minutes. Jax watched every second of it from a folding chair against the wall, and Smoky, he knew, was sitting in the truck outside the front window, and he could see her through the glass, her amber eyes fixed on the door of the building, her posture absolutely attentive, and the sight of her steadied him the way it had steadied him for 8 years. When Felix was done, he handed one of the hard drives to Mara. "The other stays here," he said. "Cold storage. No one in this office knows it exists except me, and I'm the only one with the key to the safe. You have my word." "Thank you," Mara said. Felix put his hand on the counter. He looked at her. "Your grandmother," he said, "was the best person I ever knew. I was 18 years old when she took my mother's eviction case pro bono. She saved our house. I have never forgotten it." He looked down. "If this is what I think it is, Mara, then she did not die for nothing." Mara nodded. She could not speak. Jax stood up. He extended his hand across the counter. Felix took it. The old man's grip was firm and dry and kind. "Take care of her," Felix said. "I will," Jax said. They walked out together into the parking lot. It was 10 minutes after 9 in the morning. The sun was fully up. The sky was the absolute cobalt of a New Mexico spring morning. Artesia was going about its ordinary business. Trucks were pulling in and out of the donut shop across the street. A county sheriff's cruiser passed without slowing down. Somewhere above the town, a small single-engine plane was tracing lazy circles, and the sound of its engine was distant and unthreatening, and did not set off anything in Jax's wiring, which was a small mercy he noticed and was grateful for. They were almost to the truck when Mara stopped walking. "I want to show you something," she said, "before we go back." She led him around the corner of the county building to a large polished granite plaque set into the brickwork beside the main entrance. The plaque was engraved in gold letters. It read, "This county service building was renovated in 2012 through the generous support of the Taggart Family Foundation. Senator Roy Taggart Jr. dedicated this building in honor of his father, Senator Roy Taggart Sr., 1918 to 1989, whose lifelong service to the people of New Mexico set the standard for all who would follow." Jax read it. He read it twice. "There are 17 of these in this county," Mara said, her voice very quiet. "I have counted them: the high school gymnasium, the library, the annex at the hospital, the community center. Every one of them has the same plaque. Every one of them says the same thing: set the standard, lifelong service." She looked up at him. He was the one. The senator. The one who signed the treaty in 1956 and then lobbied it out of the federal record in 1961 when oil was found. His son has been living on the money ever since. Jax stared at the gold letters. He thought about his ex-wife, Elena. He thought about the house in Bozeman. He thought about the process server in the cheap suit in the VA recovery room in Helena. He thought about Brennan saying hazard in the gravel of the pipeline yard. He thought about all the ways a system grinds a man down without ever looking him in the eye. And he thought about all the names on all the plaques on all the buildings in every small town in America. And he thought about a 41-year-old Mescalero attorney buried in a parking lot in the desert. And his jaw did not move, but somewhere behind his sternum, a very old thing shifted and locked into place. "Mara," he said. "Yes. My grandmother's old firm. They still exist. Call them today. If something happens to me, you keep going. You understand? You do not stop because I stopped." She looked up at him. For the first time since he had met her that morning, she looked afraid, and then the fear passed, and something harder took its place, and he recognized the expression because he had worn it in the mirror on the day he had signed Elena's divorce papers without opening them. "I understand," she said. They walked back to the truck. Smoky greeted them with a single soft thump of her tail against the seat. Jax started the engine. The radio, which he had forgotten to turn off, came on at a low volume, and a voice was speaking in the flat measured cadence of a Weather Service announcer. The voice said the National Weather Service has issued a flash flood watch for Eddy and Chaves counties in southeastern New Mexico. An unexpected El Niño system moving in from the Pacific has dropped significant precipitation on the southern Sacramento Mountains overnight. The Pecos River is forecast to rise rapidly over the next 12 to 18 hours. Residents along the river corridor are advised to prepare for significant localized flooding, particularly at low-lying industrial sites and oil and gas extraction operations. Jax looked at the radio. He thought about the pipeline yard. He thought about the old section of feeder line that ran along the low bank of the Pecos River, the same section that had decompressed 6 days ago and cost him his job. He thought about how to shut down its emergency valve. He thought about the fact that Carl Brennan, the supervisor, did not know how to do it because Brennan had been hired out of Oklahoma and had never worked that specific line. And the 2 senior field engineers who did know were both out of state at a training in Houston, and the only people left on site this week were rotation grunts and a greenhorn foreman, and if that pipe went underwater and ruptured, it was going to be a catastrophe that the Pecos River Valley would not recover from in anyone's lifetime. He sat with the engine running and his hand on the gear shift, and he did not move for a long time. Mara watched him. "Jax," she said. "What's wrong?" He told her. He told her in 6 sentences, the military version, clean and stripped and without ornament, and when he was finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "So what do you have to do?" "I have to go back to the work site," he said, "and I have to ask Carl Brennan for permission to enter it, and if he does not give it to me, I have to convince him to give it to me, and then I have to shut down a valve in a flood with a crew that does not know what they are doing, and I have to hope the ground stays under my feet long enough to do it." "The same." Mara looked at him. "That is not fair," she said. "No, ma'am," said Jax. "It is not." He put the truck in gear. The storm arrived at 11:47 in the morning, which was almost exactly when the National Weather Service had said it would, and New Mexico's storms, when they honored their forecasts, always seemed to do so with a kind of grim punctuality, as though the desert sky understood that people in this part of the country had very little margin for surprise and therefore declined to provide any. The first sign of it was the light. Jax was driving south on Highway 285 with Mara in the passenger seat, and Smoky stretched across both of their laps like a bridge, and he noticed the change in the quality of the morning before he noticed the clouds. The absolute cobalt of the earlier sky had given way to a thin, milky haze that turned the sun into a dime of cold white, and the shadows along the highway had lost their edges, and the temperature inside the truck had dropped 5 degrees in the last 10 minutes, even though he had not touched the vents. He looked in his side mirror. The western horizon, the direction of the Sacramento Mountains 80 miles away, was no longer a horizon at all. It was a wall, a solid slate-colored wall of weather that stretched from ground to sky and was moving east at what he estimated, by the speed of its leading edge, at somewhere between 30 and 40 miles an hour. He had seen storms like it in the Hindu Kush. He had seen storms like it in the Wakan Corridor. They did not ask permission, and they did not slow down for anyone. "How long?" Mara said, watching the mirror with him. 40 minutes, Jax said. "Maybe less." "Enough. Just." He took the next exit. He turned the truck east onto a county service road, and then south again onto the gravel access lane that led to the southern end of the Taggart oil and gas extraction corridor. The lane cut through a mesquite flat and climbed a low ridge and descended again into the shallow basin of the Pecos River floodplain, and as he crested the ridge and the floodplain opened up below them, he saw the pipeline yard for the first time in 6 days. It looked exactly as he remembered it, and it looked nothing like he remembered it. The physical infrastructure was unchanged. The 4 modular office trailers along the northern fence, the pump house, the rack of pipe sections staged for the new extension, The old Section 7 feeder line, the one that had decompressed, running on its low berm along the riverbank, with its valve housing at the western end beneath a faded green metal cover. The 14 working wellheads spread across the lower floodplain in a rough grid, each one topped with its small rusty Christmas tree of shut-off valves and pressure gauges. But the river. The Pecos was not the Pecos he had known 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago it had been a 12-foot-wide ribbon of brown water sliding slow and tired between muddy banks, so low in its channel that you could walk across it in most places without wetting your thighs. Now it was already moving. The surface had that oily, accelerated sheen that rivers get in the first hour before flood stage. The water no longer lazy but purposeful, and even from the ridge Jax could see that the banks were already 3 feet higher than they had been when he had last stood on them, and the nearest wellhead, the one closest to the bank, was going to be in the water within 2 hours. "Oh my God," Mara said. He drove down the ridge and onto the flat. The gravel crunched under the tires. The gate at the perimeter was open. He pulled up to the security booth. The guard was a kid in his 20s who did not recognize Jax and who was too harried by the approaching weather to care who was coming in. And when Jax said the words, "I need to see Carl Brennan now," the kid waved him through without asking for ID. Jax parked beside the main office trailer. He sat for a moment with his hand on the door handle. The rotors of a news helicopter, already hovering at 500 feet somewhere west of the yard to get footage of the rising river, sent down their low thudding pulse through the cab of the truck, and the sound hit him the way it always hit him, low in the stomach first, and then up the spine and out through the shoulders, and for 1 full second he was not in a truck in a pipeline yard in southeastern New Mexico in March. He was on a Chinook in a mountain valley in Paktika province in 2017, and the man on the bench across from him had just been shot through the throat and was looking at Jax with the exact uncomprehending expression of a person who did not yet understand that he was dead. Smoky moved. She came off the seat and across his lap in one smooth motion and pressed her broad skull flat against the inside of his right thigh, and the weight of her 75 pounds, solid and warm and absolutely real, anchored him to the cab of the truck the way ballast anchors a ship. She did not look up at him. She did not whine. She simply pressed and held and breathed and let him find his way back along the line of her body to the present moment. Mara had gone very still in the passenger seat. She did not say anything. She did not ask. She had an uncle, Jax would learn later, who had served in Vietnam, and she had grown up knowing the shape of this from the other side of it. And she knew, with the old knowledge that some families pass down without having to name it, that the worst thing you could do to a man in this moment was speak to him. 4 seconds. 7. 12. He came back. The helicopter sound receded. The Chinook became the cab of an F-150 again. The man with the throat wound became a memory he had already spent 8 years learning to file in a place where it did not come up from the bottom unless something very specific triggered it. The specific thing today was rotor blades at low altitude in cold, dry air. He had known this. He had been prepared for it. He had not been prepared for the helicopter to already be on station when he pulled into the yard. He lifted his hand from Smoky's head. He laid his palm on the steering wheel. He breathed out slowly. "I'm all right," he said. Mara nodded. "All right," he said again, as though saying it twice made it more true. "I'm going to go find Brennan. You stay in the truck with her. If anything happens to me in there, if it takes longer than 20 minutes, you drive out of this yard. You do not wait. You do not come looking. You drive straight to the Mescalero reservation office in Ruidoso, and you ask for a man named Peter Geronimo. You tell him what you found this morning. You tell him I sent you. You understand?" He opened the door. He stepped down. Smoky came down with him, automatic, on his left heel, and he did not send her back into the truck. He had been about to, he had intended to, but he looked at her once, and she looked at him once, and the question and the answer passed between them without words, and he understood that she was not going into that office trailer without him. Not today, not with a storm coming, and the rotor sound still fresh in his bones, and he nodded to her, and they crossed the gravel to the trailer together. Carl Brennan was at his desk. The door was open. The window unit was running. Brennan had a paper cup of coffee in his hand and a weather map open on his computer monitor, and he was talking on his cell phone to someone in a voice that was rising toward panic without yet admitting to it. He looked up when Jax's shadow fell across the doorway, and he stopped talking mid-sentence, and the cell phone slowly lowered to the desk, and the voice on the other end kept talking for a moment and then trailed off. "Harlan," Brennan said. Brennan was a man in his early 50s with a gray crew cut and the heavy sun-cured complexion of a lifetime on oil patches in 4 states, and he was not, Jax had decided over the course of 2 weeks on the crew, a cruel man. He was a tired man. He was a man whose insurance carrier had made the rules for him a long time ago, and who had learned to protect himself by following those rules without examining them. He was also a man who was right now staring at a former employee he had fired 6 days earlier for cause, and a German Shepherd the size of a small donkey standing in his office doorway during a flash flood warning, and he had no idea what to do. "What are you doing here?" Brennan said. "Section 7, Jax said. "The old feeder. It's going underwater in 90 minutes. The emergency valve is a manual lockout in a housing on the west end of that berm. I worked on it 2 weeks ago. I know where it is. I know the procedure. Your senior engineers are in Houston. Your rotation foreman does not know that valve. Nobody on site right now does." Brennan looked at him. Brennan looked at the weather map on his computer. Brennan looked at Jax again. "Harlan," he said. "I fired you." "Yes, sir. I have it in writing. I have it in your file. I cannot, under the terms of my insurance and the company's liability policy, allow a fired employee back onto the site for any reason." Jax did not answer right away. He took one slow step forward into the trailer. Smoky came with him. 1 step, no more. Jax let his eyes travel across Brennan's desk, across the framed photograph of Brennan's wife and 2 teenage daughters, across the Dallas Cowboys schedule pinned to the corkboard, across the styrofoam cup and the ballpoint pens and the small American flag on a stand that Brennan had kept there for 14 years. He looked at the flag for one long moment. Then he looked back at Brennan. "Because," he said, "if Section 7 ruptures and crude goes into the Pecos, it reaches the Delaware River confluence in 3 days, and the Rio Grande in 5, and it contaminates the drinking water of everyone downstream of here for the next decade, because the fish die, because the soil dies, because the Mescalero who have been grazing cattle on that floodplain since before there was a United States lose their allotment for a generation, because your daughters, Brennan, and my ex-wife, and everyone in this county who turns on a tap next Tuesday, drinks a little bit of what we let happen today, because there is exactly one man on this yard this week who knows how to stop it, and that man is me, and you know it, and I know it, and the only question left between us is whether you're going to let your paperwork be the reason that all of those things happen anyway." Brennan did not move. The window unit hummed. Somewhere outside, the wind had picked up, and the first fat drops of rain were hitting the metal roof of the trailer in a slow, accelerating percussion. Brennan closed his eyes. He opened them. He reached into his desk drawer, and he pulled out a clipboard, and he handed it across to Jax. "Sign in," he said. "Contractor line, I'm putting you down as an emergency consultant. Rate is $50 an hour, portal to portal. You have my permission to enter the yard. You have my permission to approach Section 7. You do not, under any circumstances, go into the water without a flotation vest and a tether. And if I tell you to come off that berm, you come off and we lose the pipe. Are we clear?" Jax signed the clipboard. "Yes, sir." Brennan looked at him. The tired man's face had gone through something in the last 90 seconds, and on the other side of it was something that looked, very faintly, like shame. "I'm sorry about the kid. About Richie. I handled that wrong." Jax looked at him for a long moment. He did not answer. He turned, and Smoky turned with him, and they walked out of the trailer into the rising wind and the first hard rain of a storm that had decided, with the punctuality of the New Mexico sky, that it was going to arrive early. Outside, Mara was still in the truck. She rolled down the window as he approached. "Well," she said, "I need you to drive out now. Take the truck. The ridge is safer. You can watch from there. You can see everything. If it goes bad, you drive to Ruidoso." She nodded. She slid across the bench to the driver's seat. He reached into the glove box and took out the letter from Elena, the one he had never opened, and he held it in his hand for a long moment, and then he tucked it into the inside pocket of his jacket against his chest, and he did not know why he did this, but he knew it was the right thing to do, and he did not second-guess it. He closed the door. Mara's eyes were wet. "Come back," she said, through the window. "I will," he said. Smoky was already at his left heel, already facing the yard, already reading the terrain, and when he turned and walked out into the first hard sheets of rain and the rising wind and the sound of the river beginning to climb its banks 60 yards to the south, she moved with him, step for step, the old working rhythm, the old mission. The storm closed around them. The rain came sideways. By the time Jax reached the staging area beside the pump house, the wind was gusting at what he estimated to be a steady 25 miles an hour with gusts to 40, and the sheets of rain were moving nearly horizontal, hitting the west side of every structure in the yard with a sound like handfuls of gravel being thrown by an angry god. The temperature had dropped another 8 degrees. The light had gone from milky white to a flat, dirty yellow-gray, and the cobalt of the morning sky was a thing he could no longer remember having seen. He stopped at the pump house and opened the equipment locker on its north wall. He took out a flotation vest, the orange inflatable kind with the pull-tab CO2 cartridge, and he pulled it over his jacket and clipped the waist strap. He took out a tether line, a 50-foot length of yellow polypropylene rope with carabiners on both ends, and he clipped one end to the D-ring on the back of his vest. He took out a headlamp and clipped it to the bill of the canvas cap he pulled from his jacket pocket. He took out a pair of insulated neoprene waders and pulled them on over his boots. He took out a 14-inch crescent wrench and a T-handle valve key and a small waterproof flashlight, and he stowed all three in the large pocket on the front of the vest. Smoky sat beside him through all of this, the rain matting her double coat into dark-soaked points along her back and flanks, her amber eyes tracking his hands as he assembled his gear, her body absolutely still. He looked down at her. "You stay on the berm," he said. "You do not go in the water. You hear me? You stay on the berm." She did not answer, because she was a dog, and because she had no intention of agreeing to any such thing, and because the contract between them had never required her to answer a thing she was not going to obey. He clipped the other end of the tether to a steel eye-bolt on the pump house wall. He walked south towards Section 7. The berm was a long, low earthen ridge that ran for about 300 feet along the north bank of the Pecos, built up in the 1970s to lift the pipeline above the normal flood stage of the river, with a gravel access road running along its top. The valve housing was at the western end of the berm. 50 yards away, the river, which 2 hours ago had been 6 feet below the top of the berm, was now 2 feet below it. Water the color of chocolate milk was churning past him at a speed he estimated at 8 or 9 miles an hour, carrying branches and fence posts and the bloated body of a dead calf that spun twice in an eddy before being snatched away downstream. He walked west along the top of the berm. The wind pushed him sideways. He leaned into it. The tether line uncoiled behind him with a small hissing sound as it played out across the wet gravel. Smoky paced at his left, one step behind, her head lowered against the wind, the rain running off her muzzle in a thin, steady stream. He reached the valve housing. It was a green steel cover about the size of a footlocker, set flush against the ground on the riverside of the berm, with 4 bolts securing a hatch at its top and a red lockout lever inside. The bolts were hex head, 3/4 inch, and they had been tightened to factory spec in 1978 and had not been touched in 23 years since the last major inspection. The ground around the housing had been eroding since the rain started. The riverside of the berm was already giving way. Water was slopping over the edge in intermittent brown waves that came up to his shins with each gust. He dropped to one knee in the mud. He pulled the crescent wrench from his vest and set it to the first bolt. He turned. The bolt did not move. He put his shoulder into it. It did not move. He shifted the wrench and leaned harder, and he felt the muscles in his right forearm and shoulder engage in the old familiar way, the slow increasing load of a stubborn mechanical problem, and he gave it everything he had for a 3 count. And at the end of that 3 count, the bolt broke free with a small sharp crack and a shower of rust, and he backed it out 1 full turn and moved to the second. The second came off faster. The third was seized harder than the first. He had to hit the wrench with the flat of his palm 3 times before it broke free. His palm split open. Blood ran down his wrist and mixed with the rain on the mud. He did not stop. The fourth came off in 6 turns. He lifted the hatch. Water poured in. The housing had filled with rainwater already, and the lockout lever was submerged, and he had to plunge his right hand down 8 inches into ice-cold water to find it. His fingers went numb immediately. He found the lever by feel. He pulled. It did not move. He braced his left hand on the rim of the housing, and he pulled with everything in his right arm, and the old lever, stiff with 23 years of desert grit and now soaked in floodwater, resisted him for 1 long, terrible second, and then gave. And the sound of the valve shutting inside the pipe was a deep, satisfying, mechanical thunk that he felt through the ground under his knees. The valve was shut. The line was isolated. If the pipe ruptured now, no crude would flow. He let out a breath. He leaned back on his heels in the mud, and he looked up, and the rain hit him in the face, and he smiled. A small, tight soldier's smile that no one was there to see except the German Shepherd standing 4 feet behind him with her amber eyes fixed on his face. And that was when the berm gave way. He heard it before he felt it, a long, low sound like fabric tearing and a hollow rushing sound under it, and the ground on the riverside of the housing separated from the ground on the land side of the housing in one sudden clean fracture, and the section of the berm beneath his knees dropped 18 inches and tilted toward the water. He lunged sideways. He got his right foot under him. He got his left foot under him. He took 1 step away from the failing ground, and his left boot came down on a section of old subsurface pipe that had been exposed by the erosion, a 4-inch steel nub sticking 2 inches up out of the mud, and the boot slid sideways along the wet metal, and his ankle rolled, and his weight went over his hip, and he was already falling before his mind caught up with the fall. He hit the water. The cold was a physical concussion. It went through the neoprene waders and the jacket and the vest and into his chest wall and stopped his breath for a full 2 seconds before the reflex inhale kicked in. And when it did, he took in a mouthful of brown river water that tasted of silt and diesel and the faint, unmistakable chemical note of old hydraulic fluid. The current had him. He did not panic. Panic was a luxury for people who had never been in water they could not get out of. He went on his back. The way he had been trained, he got his feet pointed downstream, he kept his chin up, he pulled the CO2 tab on the vest and felt it inflate around his chest with a hard whump of expanding gas, and he scanned with his peripheral vision for the nearest fixed object. The tether. He still had the tether. It ran back from the D-ring on his vest toward the pump house. 50 feet of polypropylene rope that was paying out fast as the current carried him downstream. And he knew with the instant clear calculation that combat had beaten into him that he had somewhere between 8 and 11 seconds before the tether came tight and snapped him into the bank at a velocity that was going to do very serious damage to his spine. 8 seconds. 6. And then 75 pounds of gray and tan fur hit the water beside him with the cleanest, most deliberate splash he had ever heard in his life. Smoky. She had come off the berm. She had not jumped blindly. She had not jumped in panic. She had watched him for one full second. He would realize this later, reconstructing the event in his mind 100 times over the coming weeks, and she had calculated the angle and the speed and the distance, and she had launched herself from the top of the berm on a vector that intersected his drift path at exactly the point where the river's main current slowed against a shallow gravel bar 6 feet from the bank. She hit the water 6 feet to his right and downstream of him. She did not swim. She planted. Her 4 paws came down on the gravel bar, and she locked her shoulders, and she lowered her head against the current, and 75 pounds of muscle and bone and 2 inches of wet double coat became the closest thing a human body could find in a flooding New Mexico river to a pier. Jax saw her. He reached. His right hand closed around the back of her harness, the broad nylon strap she had worn since her 3rd tour, the strap that had a steel ring on the top for exactly this kind of contingency. And he got his fingers through the ring, and he held on. The river tried to take him. The river did not take him. Smoky did not move. Her paws dug in against the gravel, her hindquarters went low, her front shoulders took the load of a 180-pound man being pulled by a current moving at 9 miles an hour, and she held. She simply held. She did not bark, she did not whimper, she did not turn her head to look at him. She kept her amber eyes forward downstream into the wind, and she stood, and she stood, and she stood. Jax got his feet under him. It took him 4 tries. The current kept sweeping them out from beneath him, and each time it did, he pulled against Smoky's harness, and she pulled back, and he planted his right boot on the gravel bar and then his left, and he got his knees straight, and he stood up, chest deep in the river, with his right hand still locked in the harness ring, and the dog beside him braced like the last stake of a tent in a gale. He looked down at her. She looked up at him. Her amber eyes said, "I have you." She had never said anything else to him, in 12 years of working together, and she did not need to say it now. He gripped the harness tighter, he turned them both upstream, he took 1 step, the gravel bar held, he took another, and another. Together step by step against the current, with the tether rope now coiling slack behind them, as they moved back toward the bank, a 180-pound man and a 75-pound dog walked out of the Pecos River together, and the water let them go, because it had not expected them to work together, and it had not been ready for the anchor. They reached the bank. Jax went to his knees in the mud. Smoky stood beside him, her whole body trembling now with adrenaline and cold, her coat soaked through, water sheeting off her flanks in small brown waterfalls. He put both of his arms around her neck. He put his face into her wet fur. He did not cry. He had not cried in 16 months, and he was not going to start in the mud on the bank of the Pecos River in a flash flood. But he held her, hard, with both arms, and she leaned the full weight of her body into his chest. And for a long moment, neither one of them moved. Up on the berm, 50 feet above them, Carl Brennan was standing in the rain. He had come out of the office trailer at some point in the last 2 minutes. His gray crew cut was plastered flat to his skull. His coffee cup was gone from his hand. He was looking down at Jax and Smoky, and his face was doing something that Jax could not quite identify from this distance. A long metal ladder was lowered down the berm. 2 of the rotation grunts were on it, shouting, their voices lost in the wind. Jax looked up at them. He nodded once. He stood up, with effort, the adrenaline already fading, and his ankle beginning to register the roll it had taken on the pipe, and he walked to the base of the ladder. He let the grunts help him up the first 3 rungs. Smoky climbed behind him, her claws finding purchase on the aluminum, her body absolutely focused on the task of getting up out of the river's reach. At the top, Brennan was waiting. He had a heavy